Good morning, nerds. It is I. Game masters are a remarkably scarce thing in the tabletop RPG community. I've seen articles all over the place talking about the shortage, especially for D&D 5th edition. But the only thing scarcer seems to be a GM who also gets to be a player. Whether it's because they don't have enough time in their schedule or because they just don't like being a player that much. There are a lot of GMs who just GM. Now, for most of my GM history, I've not been one of them. I've almost always had at least one group that I've been in as a player. In fact, there have been plenty of times where I've been a player, but not a GM, even after I started GMing. And yet, for almost the entirety of this year, I have not been a player for even a single session, which I think is the longest dry spell that I have ever had. And it's also coming to an end. So, in this week's video, I am going to reflect on it, why I stopped being a player, how it feels to be a forever GM, and what I see for me in the future. If that sounds interesting to you, then sit down, buckle up, and have your GM screens at the ready. You'll be needing them. But before we go any further, please do subscribe to the channel, as doing so will make you an honorary player in my group. So, to understand how I became a forever GM, we need to start with my last campaign, and by extension with my last character. Hey everybody, I'd like to introduce you to Koge the Burglar. There's some dispute on the pronunciation. I think I initially had it as Koga, which is close enough to the Danish pronunciation, but being that I was playing with a bunch of Americans, it drifted over time. Now, Koga was a character in a game called Torchbearer, which is an indie game designed by Luke Crane. When I pitch it to people who don't know anything about RPGs, I say it's a riff on 1980s D&D with all the mechanics thrown out, which is actually fairly accurate. While it does have classes and levels, it is a d6 dice pool based game. It uses completely different progression mechanics, and it has much more of a focus on roleplay and character development, something which the mechanics do a very good job of supporting. It's a fun game, and I highly recommend it. As I said, Koga was a burglar, basically the game's version of the rogue class, but only for halflings, and I'd been buying him in this campaign for about a year. I'd taken him from a dirt poor thief all the way to a minor noble, and I'd hoped to keep him going on and on from there. But then we come to the final adventure we had of that campaign. We were rooting around in the homestead of the party's nemesis, and inside we found a whole bunch of hostages from local town, and a magical hand axe. Now, being that I already had a magic sword, and that one of the other players already had his own magic weapon, it fell to the third player to claim the weapon for herself. It had some neat abilities, but we didn't really think much of it. Until the final session, when, having freed all the hostages and returned back to the main town, we were informed that ownership of the axe confers being the mayor, and suddenly, everyone was treating this character like she was royalty. I was rather pissed. Why, you may ask? Did I not feel happy for my friend who'd been playing for an entire year, role-playing enthusiastically, and he finally got to, have this big moment? No, I didn't. And I felt entirely justified in not being happy with that moment. And the reason is that she attained what my character had been working on for an entire year in a single moment. I did say that I took my character from a dirt poor thief with no money up to a minor noble. I should elaborate. This had been my goal the entire time. Torchbearer has a system, I believe it's called Enterprise, it's in the War Master's Manual, where you can acquire things like religious offices, guild licenses, patents of nobility, and these can confer a number of benefits. But you have to save up a lot of money to get them, and it is incredibly difficult. So, from day one, I began saving up to get a patent of nobility and enter the lower ranks of the upper class. I saved up that money. It took a lot of effort. Torchbearer has a very awkward encumbrance system where you have to track the inventory slots on your pocket, your torso, your satchel or backpack, and I had stuffed everything I could with every valuable I could to the point where it was getting inconvenient. But I saved up enough money and I bought that patent of nobility. Now, it took a couple of sessions for this to take effect. When it did, turns out not a lot of halfling noble lineages. So what happened is my character became the adopted son of another family from his village and had to take on a completely new name. That was fine, I was happy with this. Move on to step 2, Low Holy Office. It does give you some extra benefits, and it also opens you up eventually to High Holy Office. And you may be wondering, why did I want Holy Office? I wanted to make my character the Pope of the setting, for the hell of it. because there is a system in Torchbearer called Precedence. It's ranked from 0 to 7. Adventurers are Precedence 0, Order of Commoners are Precedence 1 or 2, the Nobility are Precedence 3 or 4, and then Royalty and Upper Clergy are like 5, 6, and 7. That's not exactly how it works. I'm doing this from memory. I will try and find it in the book and put something up on slide. The important point here is High Holy Office gives you Precedence 6, and being a level 10 Halfling Burglar can give you +1 Precedence. If I played my cards right and worked my character's ass off, I could have maxed out my character's precedence, which is really hard to do, and so I really wanted to do it. And you know what? I made it part of the way. I did get to the lower nobility. No one ever treats me like a noble. In fact, a lot of NPCs just outright insulted me constantly, which also annoyed me. I'm certainly not against, NPCs insulting me in general, but when I've gone to the effort of becoming a noble, it kind of felt like what I was doing was all in vain. And then when another player was handed power and authority, basically on a whim, I also felt like everything I had been doing was in vain. And so, while I have said that I was justified in being annoyed at the GM and in being annoyed at the player, I'm probably not nearly as justified in doing what I did next. And that was basically to throw a tantrum. I'll be honest here, I won't mince words. I was a bit petty. Given that I was playing an ambitious social climber, I did always try to give my character a veneer of morality. There was always the sense that he was trying to help himself so that he could then help others. At least that was his justification. I got rather angry and had our good friend Kogi be the most selfish bastard he could and give up on all thoughts of altruism for the entire rest of the session, and then change his belief in creed. The only path forward I could see from this was if he became pretty much an explicitly selfish, evil character. To which one of the other players rather sarcastically pointed out, I mean, you kind of are that already. But having it be so on the nose was a bit too much for me. And if that campaign had continued, I might actually have retired Koga, to be honest, because I didn't feel I had any further to go with him. But alas, that last session was the 30th of December 2022, and after that the campaign went on hiatus. Now, I then ran that group, including my former GM, through Burning Wheel, through the demo scenario they have for that, which is called Trouble in Hocken, and that is a story for another time. But after that, the group kind of fell apart, so there is no future for Koge. I tell you all this to kind of understand my headspace coming out of my last campaign. I was frustrated with how things had gone, that the amount of effort I was putting into trying to build on my character's long-term goals was going consistently unrewarded, and was occasionally being just thrown in my face. So I was a bit demotivated. That being said though, I could always have just joined a new group. That is a bit difficult in my experience. Trying to find LFG listings that are in my time zone is fairly difficult, but I wasn't really looking that hard. I did look now and then, but if I see something that's like 7 PM Eastern, that is literally midnight where I am. I can't start a game at that time. The real thing that stopped me from digging through every possible listing I could find though, is that I almost didn't care. It used to be that I enjoyed being a player and GM equally, and that I always wanted to do both at once, and that when I wasn't doing both, I felt something was missing. That began to change. If you've never been a game master before, if you've only ever been a player, or if you've never been a player before and you're somehow watching these videos, you may not understand the difference. When you're a player, you have one character, one total, that you are very, very invested in, but that's about it. You get to use your character and do things in the world whenever it's their turn, or whenever the GM gives them a spotlight outside of turn order and combat. You can chip in on other players' actions, cracking jokes, offering help, stuff like that. But for the most part, you spend a lot of time watching other people do stuff. I didn't really mind it much at first. I'm always the sort of person to be cracking jokes, offering to help, trying to get involved everywhere I can. And so I always felt I had something to do. Being a GM is completely different. It is basically impossible for the players to do anything without going through you in some way. Plain and simple. What this means is that you are, for the 2, 3, maybe even 4 hours that you play, the center of attention. I should say, I'm not a total attention whore. I say that as a long-time game master who started a YouTube channel and is trying to get attention from strangers on the internet, but please just ignore that. In small groups, you do spend very little time waiting around, and I do actually enjoy being a player in a small group. If I'm in a big group, or if I'm in a group where, there's a lot of downtime stuff, or a lot of long rules discussions that don't involve me, that's the only time that I start to notice player boredomitis sinking in. And so in like the first half of this year, as I was reflecting on the fact that I was kind of transitioning into being a forever GM, I kind of looked back on being a player almost sourly, and I was kind of like, do I really miss this? Is this really that fun? I'm already enjoying myself as a GM. I don't need to dig into my schedule for another game. And so, although I would, check various Discord servers now and then for, game ads, I never really did that all too seriously. There is a second big reason though, and that's because as a player, you only have one character. You have a lot of investment in that character, you do get to play them from week to week, and you do get to build up much more of a sense of who they are. But as a GM, you can be anything from a goblin warlord, to a barkeep, to a corporate executive, to a squirrel, to a table. You can be anything. You don't really have much attachment to any of your characters except maybe a few like recurring NPCs, but you do get a lot more variety in what you get to roleplay, and that is something that I've come to enjoy. About 2 coming up on 3 years ago, I was in a West Marches server, where I was playing in basically a series of interconnected one-shots with various random players and various random GMs. And in the nearly a year that I was in there, I played about 6 different characters. And that's because I just kept getting bored of them. I think 2 of them died, but the other 4 all got retired. Also, those are actually the only 2 characters I have ever lost. Both of them were in Cyberpunk Red, and both of them were in that one server. Fun times. As a player, retiring a character is a big thing. You have to go back through character creation, reintroduce them to the party, get into the feel of them. As a GM, it's all much easier. If you have a cool idea for a character, you just drop them in as an NPC. And if you get bored of that character, well, they're probably going to die soon anyway. Nothing to worry about. And while I do have my regular stable of NPCs in my current campaign, they're kind of built in and around the Reclaimer town that the party is living in, I do get to bring in new characters every mission and have a bunch of fun with them. Fun that I simply couldn't have if I was a player. And yet, for all of this bitching and whining about what being a player is like, I'm becoming a player again. One of my friends, actually Darkly Yours, who did appear in my Call of Cthulhu The Haunting review, and who does have a channel that you can go subscribe to, he is running a Pathfinder campaign. And while up to now I had been thinking that I wasn't really too keen to be a player, and for a long time I've thought I'm not too keen on playing Pathfinder, I am now going to be a player in a Pathfinder campaign. This will be interesting. There's going to be a group of 6 people, which is, a lot, so we'll see how it goes. I wouldn't say I'm excited, but I would say I'm curious, and also maybe a little apprehensive. It's been a long time since I've been a player, and I kind of want to see, how it is compared to last time. I've been trying to put a character together. I have a concept figured out of an, overly spoiled, noble-born brat of a gnome bard, which I know, sure, member of the nobility, kind of an asshole. It does kind of fit the mod of my last character, so I might change the concept. We'll see what inspires me. But there are some things that I am looking forward to. First off, I get to play RPGs without having to prepare them. Game prep is something that I don't mind doing, at least in theory, because I have had a few struggles with writer's block lately. Being a player, actually getting to enjoy the game without having to do a whole bunch of work for it to happen, kind of sounds enjoyable. Likewise, as much as I've often poo-pooed Pathfinder as D&D but more complicated, I am kind of curious to see how it shakes out. And finally, it's going to be with a bunch of friends. It's going to be with Darkly Yours as GM, who is pretty much the only player who has survived from session 1 of my last campaign, 2 of the other players from my campaign, and another person that I've chatted to here and there, plus some other people besides. It will be interesting, it will be fun, and I'm looking forward to hanging out with friends. So, here's hoping it goes better than last time. I think reflecting on my time as a forever GM, I kind of feel a bit embarrassed that it ever happened. The more I hear myself speak as I'm recording this, the whinier I sound. Oh, my last campaign sucked. Oh, not being the center of attention sucks. Oh, having to stick to one character sucks. Maybe the best thing I can do for myself is to throw myself back in with both hands, to confront my fears as a player, and do everything in my power to prove them false, to be a bit more stoic about the whole thing. For all that I do enjoy the limelight, quite a bit, I do also care very strongly about the people around me. I want everyone that I'm with to be having a good time. At the end of the day, that's what playing an RPG is all about, and that's what I should really be putting first. I'm trying to find a way to wrap this video up, but I guess that's the point I'd like to leave it with. Sometimes we can get fixated on our own problems, on our frustrations, on the issues that we've had with people around us. And at some point, you've just got to let it go. It's not all about you, it's not all about your fun, it's about everyone at the table. That is what has to matter more than anything else. And so, it's a wrap. Thank you all so much for watching. Operation Large But Painful is proceeding apace, but I don't think it'll be out this year because I'm like 2,000 words into the script and I've only scratched the surface. If you enjoyed this video, then please like it, share it with your friends, and leave a comment down below. Have you ever been a Forever GM, and how did you find it? If you'd like to see more videos like this one, then please subscribe and hit the bell for notifications. It really does help grow the channel. Now, my game starts in 2 hours, and I have about 1 day to edit this entire video if I want to get it out this week. So I am off to go rush. So, once more, thank you all so much for watching, and until I see you next, farewell.